Thanks very much, David, for the introduction. You'll notice that I started off as a forest ecologist and then I switched over to agriculture. But I'm going to talk to you today about trees again, because I do love trees. And this is a new, it's really a thought experiment, actually, that we've been undertaking in relation to a project that was funded via the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council in the UK called Add Trees. And its job is to do what it says, is to help us to understand where we should plant trees in the UK and which kind of trees we should plant. So our job as biologists was to add some biological realism to this idea, and it's been an interesting journey, and so I'm going to tell you about that today. Right, let's move on. Okay, this is the Haywain painting by John Constable, painted in 1821. Just give you a few seconds to look at it. It's just lovely, isn't it? Okay, that's probably enough. Okay, I'll ask you later why I showed you this. Okay, so the UK, I don't know if you've ever been there, it's pretty treeless, really. In the Neolithic period, between 6,000 and 5,000 years before present, the pollen record indicates a massive change in the vegetation. Basically, the loss of trees from the UK's ecology, elms in particular, so something called the Neolithic elm decline is very clear in the pollen record. You know, the discovery in the kind of archaeological record of pests like Scolitis, the bark beetle, and Ophiostoma ulmi, the Dutch elm disease pathogen. And, you know, here's a classic image from around that time. As the trees were being cut down, they were building these, who knows what they are, clocks or something, like Stonehenge. So this gives you a picture of what was happening in the UK at the time, 5,000 years ago. Using historical records like the Domesday Book, the UK has been invaded many, many times, and the Normans came along in 1066, as you may know. Here's William the Conqueror, and if we look at historical records and the Domesday Book, which was this big kind of survey of what had this chap won when he invaded, who owned what land, what was on the land. We've got forest records as well. We can start to put together a kind of picture of the decline of forest cover from about 15% in the year 1000 down to around 5% forest cover, woodland cover, by the start of the 20th century. And then there was this uptick. The UK went to war, and we realised that we needed some more trees, so we weren't so kind of reliant on imports. And so the UK Forestry Commission was instigated to basically put more trees into the landscape, mainly these exotic fast-growing conifers, Sitka spruce, etc. So we've had an uptick here, but we're still only about 10–12%, I guess, of forest cover in the UK. And you can see from this assessment for Europe, based on satellite imagery, that the UK looks pretty deforested when we compare it to the European average. 12 to 13% woodland cover, forest cover in the UK, compared to nearly 40% across the rest of Europe. About half of our cover is exotic conifer plantations. Only 2.5% of the UK is what we call ancient woodland, which is which we think has been continuously for a forest for more than 400 years. Okay? So we're thin on trees. But the UK government in recent years has become kind of interested in the idea of net zero. Do you have net zero in South Africa? We want to have a non-positive, a non-exacerbative impact on climate change. And as part of net zero, the idea is to increase our forest cover across the UK. So in England, we want to get up to 16.5% by 2050. It's a pretty thin ambition, that one. Scotland, 21% by 2032. The Scots want to go for it. And Wales, they want to go up by 2,000 hectares per year. So this is a little photograph. I have started volunteering myself to plant trees. So I've joined up a little charity in Devon, and every weekend we go out and we plant trees, and we have to protect them from herbivores of various kinds. But I've done my little bit for net zero. I did fly down to South Africa there. So and the ticket did show me my carbon footprint, and I'm going to have to plant quite a few more trees. Right. So the question is, what trees to plant where? There's this big debate about the right tree in the right place. That's the kind of catchphrase that's being used in the UK and elsewhere. So there have been these debates about what's native, the idea of having native woodland versus exotics, the idea, broadleaf trees versus conifers, actually going planting trees versus trying to encourage natural regeneration, the impact of climate change on the future of forests in the UK. Things are changing quite rapidly now. In line with that, the idea of assisted migration. So do we project forward as to what the climate might be like in the next 50 years and bring in drought and heat tolerant trees from Southern Europe to replace what we're likely to lose in terms of our native species? And then, the role of diversity. Do we want high production exotic conifer plantations like these, or do we want the more diverse mix of natural native, let's say, inverted commas species in what most people would consider to be a native woodland? So a lot of debate about this, and amazingly for a country that has very few trees, it gets quite heated. So this gets us to the Add Trees project. So Add Trees was funded by EPSRC, the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. Notice this is not BBSRC, the Biology Research Council, or NERC, the Natural Environment Research Council. So quite a different perspective and approach. So the idea is to use various downscaling tools to try and project forward at field scale what the future climate might look like in each field in the UK, and then to run tree growth models using that downscaled climate data to have a best guess as to how different tree species might perform in that field over the next 50 to 100 years. I'll let you just process that for a bit. Okay, so if we're capable of doing this, then for landowners, who are maybe deciding to make a choice from switching from, let's say, livestock production to forestry, the idea is to have some sort of online tool where they can zoom in and click on their field, and the model will project forward the carbon storage within that particular field based on what we think the climate might look like over those coming decades. So yeah, downscaling climate projections then, I mean, it's based on something called the JULES model, the Joint UK Land Environment Simulator. It's a process-based model which tries to estimate how different vegetation classes will perform under different climates. It only currently has 2 tree species in it, oak and Sitka spruce, so it's a little bit limited. And then, you know, it takes a long time to run. It's a very complex model. So the idea is to sort of produce statistical emulators to give a much faster output. So yeah, if you're a landowner, you go on, you click the button, and it tells you how much carbon you're going to get over the next 50 years, right? So that's all great. But there's quite a lot missing from JULES. And one of them is pests and diseases, which, you know, us biologists who are involved in the Ag Trees project, we are the fly in the ointment because we say, yeah, that's great, but we've just had ash dieback come through the UK. Ash dieback caused by the fungus Hymenoscyphus fraxineus, first kind of detected in Europe in around 1997, confirmed in the UK 2012, they've got there a bit earlier, and it's killed more than half of the ash trees in the UK already, and it's probably going to kill the rest, pretty much. Ash used to be the most important hardwood forestry species in the UK, and if Ag Trees had been run as a project in 2010, it would have been recommending that people plant ash, no doubt. But this came out of nowhere. So we've got this problem that unexpected things happen, and biology is this killer for the beautiful models that JULES produces, because we just sometimes don't know what's going to happen next. So yeah, this analysis shows where it's spread across Europe. This analysis is a best guess as to what fraction of trees are killed after, I mean, you guys at the back won't be able to see this probably, but it's kind of, you know, estimating that after 15 years of the pathogen being in a country, it's reached about 60% mortality, and there's really no indication of a leveling off that, okay? Right, so what are we dealing with then? How do we incorporate the idea of pests and diseases in these kind of predictive models for carbon sequestration in afforestation projects? And it would be lovely to have beautiful process-based models of the infection process and the impacts on carbon sequestration in trees to add into JULES and do it that way. But, you know, we just don't know what's going to happen. Do we get a moderate pest impact when the next thing comes along? Or do we get some sort of catastrophe for the next pest? So we need to know about the next pest, really, and what's going to happen. But how can we do this? It's really complicated. We've kind of racked our brains about how we can predict forward that far. The annoying thing about trees is they live so long, don't they? So, you know, you plant them and the carbon benefit is not for 50 years. I mean, we never think really 50 years ahead. But if you're talking about net zero, you have to think to the end of the next production cycle. It's not like in agriculture, there's an annual process, right? So we've got multiple uncertainties. Oh, whoop. I gave it all away. What's going to arrive next? Okay, we've got loads of pests and pathogens already. We can kind of know what they do. What's going to happen next? How many different pests and pathogens could arrive in the UK in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years? What damage do they do? What is the actual impact on production? What's the host range? How likely are they to get in, and what can government do to kind of mitigate or to reduce the likelihood of invasion? Do we put more money into, you know, inspections at ports when live plants are coming in. When, I mean, the classic one is wooden crates, and you probably know this, right? Wooden crates are full of beetle larvae that are just waiting to burst out. If they get here, how likely are they to establish? And importantly, what if 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 different pests and diseases arrive? What's the interactive effect? So it gets pretty complex pretty quick. So, you know, we had a think, where is the information? You know, how can we get the information? And luckily, there is this one source now. It's the DEFRA Plant Health Risk Register, PHRR. Excuse me, just have a look at it. DEFRA is the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the UK. Prompted by the ash dieback disaster, DEFRA decided to establish a horizon scanning system called the Risk Register. If you like, I put the URL at the bottom of the page here. If you've got your laptop, you can log on. Take a look. You can download all of the data. One click. Currently, there are about 1,500, no, so 14, just over 1,400 different pests and diseases of agricultural, horticultural, and forestry crops listed, and it contains a lot of information. Importantly for this discussion, relative risks, so ordinal risks of arrival and establishment, likely damage levels, known host range, and what they call the value at risk, so what the economic impact would be. Okay? So let's take a little look at the data. So from this 1,400, what we did was to match up the known host range to the 74 most common, or both native and most common tree species in the UK. And then take a look at the number of pests and diseases which are associated or thought to be pests of particular trees. Okay, so and we looked at both cases where a pest is thought to affect a genus, and cases where it was specifically listed as a pest of a particular species of tree. Okay, so it just gives you an idea of the distribution of pests and diseases for different tree species, which might be exotics or naturalized in the UK or native species. Okay, so you know, for many of them, we're talking hundreds of different pests and diseases which are not yet present in the UK. These are waiting in the wings to invade, okay? So we're very far from the full complement of biological impact on our trees in the UK. Genera like Prunus, Malus, so the plums and cherries, apples, pines, pears, oaks, spruces, poplars, willows, and acer, sycamores and things tend to have the most pests, potential pests associated with them. So that gives us some kind of idea of the scope of the issue that we might be facing over the next few years. Okay, and what types of pests and diseases are these? So they're also listed by their broad taxonomic groupings. So insects and the number of trees they affect. These are log scales again. So for some of these insects, they're thought to affect, you know, upwards of 30, 40 different tree species. Fungi next, most important, viruses and viroids, nematodes, bacteria, phytoplasms, oomycetes. Strangely enough, not that many oomycetes. A lot of them have already got that. Some plant parasitic plants and things as well. Anyway, so it gives you an idea of the scope. There are about 600 pests and pathogens which could affect our tree species that haven't arrived yet. Okay. So the next thing we have to do is think more deeply about this question of likelihood of arrival and potential impact. So I've zoomed in a little bit, perhaps not enough, but if you go to a particular page for a pest or disease, you'll see at the bottom there are these risk ratings, and they're on a scale from 1 to 5. So 1 is low risk, low impact, and 5 is high risk, high impact, and multiply those two together, and it gives you kind of joint, likelihood times impact score between 1 and 25. This particular one, which is a beetle, has a joint score of 16, so it's pretty high. Once you add in the value at risk, it goes up to 80, because this one attacks a lot of our important timber species, so a big problem. Okay. So this is a zoom in on that. So it just gives you a score for all of these, and the risk register is very honest. If you go and take a look at the data, it tells you what all the uncertainties are. They've made a best guess at what these are. So and so the important thing here is also to notice that we have an unmitigated risk estimate and a mitigated risk estimate. Mitigated is thinking about a scenario where the government has implemented more plant biosecurity actions like port inspections and that kind of thing. Okay? So you'll notice that under an unmitigated scenario, the likelihood of arrival and establishment is 4, but if we're looking for the thing, then we might be able to take it down to 2 relative rating. Okay, good. So that's how it works. So we've got all this data. It's great. So I'm just going to give some examples and to give you an analog of how we might think about this in human disease terms. Okay, so here we have likelihood along the x-axis and impact on the y-axis. Okay, so the easy one first. The likelihood of getting the common cold is very high, but the impact on you is very low. You don't mind getting a common cold too much. Then there's something called Q fever. Who's heard of Q fever? No, I haven't either. That's because the likelihood of you getting it is very low, and even if you get it, you probably wouldn't notice that you had it anyway. So there's Q fever in that corner. The likelihood of getting Bas Congo Tibrovirus is very low, luckily, because if you get it, you will die. So that's in the top left-hand corner, impact 5. And, back in the Middle Ages, we've got the daddy of them all, the Black Death. If you were in Europe in the Middle Ages, you're pretty likely to get it and you would die. So this gives you an idea of that kind of spread of impacts and likelihoods. So if we think about the tree pests, now we have examples of, in the UK, things like the Culsey teak borer. We don't grow a lot of teak in the UK, but it possibly affects some of our tree species. It's unlikely to arrive, and if it did, it's not going to do a lot of damage. Top right, the emerald ash borer, it's probably going to get here eventually. It would have a huge effect, but unfortunately, ash dieback's killed all its host already, so it's too late. You missed the boat. Just to give you a feeling, there's something called the lilac root weevil, and then the Yunnan pine weevil, unlikely to get here, but would do a lot of damage if it did. I say here, I mean the UK, right? Okay, good. So let's look at the whole lot. So this is a rather complex image, just showing you this likelihood times impact ratio for all of those different tree species, and the the dots are give you the number of pests and diseases which have been given that particular 1 to 25 rating, and it's listed by the kind of median impact, if we want to call it that. The colours tell you whether it's exotic in orange, native in green, or naturalised in blue. And at the top here, we have some prunuses and pinuses and some oaks here. The oak one is particularly worrying for us. It's our sort of national tree. And then down at the bottom, the sort of more unusual tree species, which, well, you would have heard of Sequoiadendron giganteum. Doesn't have any pests associated with it, cedars and a few others, limes, tilia. Okay, so it gives you kind of idea of the spread. That's all very well, but at some point we have to try and turn qualitative ordinal estimates into actual risks and percentage impacts. Okay, right, so first of all, let's look at the risk of arrival of these things. So, we have this list of known arrivals since the 1970s of new pests and pathogens. Round about 2007 or so, there was an acceleration of arrivals in the UK, or confirmed arrivals, heading to an arrival rate of about 1 pest or disease per year. Okay, so it allows us to kind of scale our ordinal arrival risk to some sort of actual value of rate. Okay. Yeah, so we assume that likelihood 5 has the highest probability, and then we do a bit of a we basically make something up. I'll admit it. We say the arrival ratio, or arrival value 4 has half the arrival rate of a 5. 3 has half of a 4. 2 has half of a 3, etc. So the rates halve for each ordinal scale down. Okay. We make some other assumptions. We assume that the impact of the arrival on tree production is also works at a halving, kind of in a halving fashion, and we assign, based on our knowledge of what Ash Dieback did effectively, we assign an impact 5 means a score of, let's say, between half and all of the trees die. So we take that as a 75% loss, okay? And then we say that the impact of a 4 is half of that. So instead of between half and 100% of the, so 50 and 100% of the trees die, we say between 25 and 50% of the trees die. So it's we're being quite, I guess, generous with the scale, because we're halving as we go down. So we're being, let's say, optimistic about the relationship between the damage levels and the scores. Okay, this will become clearer when I show you some examples. Okay. And then what we did was to say, well, if we project forward to 25 years, what's the probability of all these different things arriving, and how much damage would they do? And that's where we have to make some guesses. So how do we deal with the idea of multiple pests and diseases arriving and attacking the same tree species? There's very little information in the literature about this. Everybody looks at one thing. Very few people look at 2. Nobody looks at 3. So we kind of thought, well, how would this? What do we know? What do we know? So we can think about a situation where we've got 2 pests, and they kind of fly around and they land on a tree, and if they land on it, they kill it. And sometimes they both land on the same tree, and sometimes they land on one tree. And if if each one of those caused 20% losses, then in that randomized case, the combined loss together would be 36%, which is, when you multiply together the residual production remaining for each one, which is 0.8 times 0.8 equals 0.64. Okay, it's not worried about the maths too much, but that's how it works. We can also imagine a situation where they don't kill the trees, but they just reduce the production by a certain fraction, let's say 20% again. And if they act independently on the tree, again, you would get a 36% loss of production. Okay. Again, this is a thought experiment. It's not the real situation. We don't know what that is in most cases. Okay, so that's a kind of independent effects situation. We could have a situation where the arrival of one pathogen actually primes the tree defenses to the next one, by something like systemic acquired resistance, let's say. Okay, so in this case, let's say this one arrives, triggers the plant immunity, and then when the next one arrives, it's protected. Okay, so in that case, multiple arrivals have less of an impact than individual arrivals will have. We could also have a case where basically once one of them has got in, there's competition inside the leaf, let's say, there's the mycelium of one pathogen is built up inside the leaf, for example, stops another one from getting in, keeps it out. Or we can have a situation where there is facilitation among the arrivals, and this is based on a real example of acute oak decline in the UK. So it's a bacterial kind of microbiome type situation. We don't exactly know what causes acute oak decline, but what we find is if there's a buprestid beetle, which if at the 2-spot buprestid, I think it's called, if it drills holes into the tree, it can introduce these bacterial, perhaps allow these bacteria to get in, and that causes more damage than either one of those pest diseases would do by itself. Right. So here are two extremes: less damage, more damage. This situation is kind of in the middle. So let's go with that one. Independent effects. Right. Okay. So plausible losses. So we've decided that we're going to call a score of 5 has a loss rate of between 0.5 and 1, median 0.75, and halve it all the way down, so a score of 1 has a median impact of 5%, less than 5%. You hardly notice it. Arrival probabilities. Based on that arrival rate of 1 per year, given that we've got 600 that haven't got there yet, or 600 or so haven't got there yet, the annual arrival rate for a likelihood score 5 would be about 0.6% per year, 0.7% per year, which over 25 years gives you an arrival probability of 16%. So the actual probabilities are actually minute. The annual arrival probabilities are minute. It's just that there are so many of them waiting to turn up, which gives you these bigger probabilities, and it's cumulative over time, of course. Just because you stop it in year 1, could get in year 2, and it could get in year 10 with year 25. So we can then start combining them together. So let's say for pest A, there's a 10% chance of arrival and a 50% loss on arrival. I should have used 75, never mind. Easy maths, 5% loss over the long term. Okay, so 50%, but there's only a 10% chance of arrival. So your long-term probable loss is 5%. Pest B, 50% chance of arrival, 25% loss on arrival is 12.5% loss in the long-term probability. The combined loss then is essentially 1 minus the production remaining of each of these multiplied And that gives you a combined loss for the two of 16.9%. That's how it works. And then you do this for basically all of the tree species and all of the pests and diseases that could affect each tree species. Okay, so what does this all look like? So once we've got our probabilities of arrival, we can plot out over 25 years how many of the different impact classes are likely to arrive over 25 years in an unmitigated case and a mitigated case. The mitigations using our model, which again is just a hypothesis, reduces the arrival by about 70%, by about 30%. Good. And then once we've done all the multiplications and all that kind of stuff, we can estimate the remaining production levels of each of our tree species under that scenario in 25 years' time. And what we find is that in the unmitigated case, we're losing probably about half of the productivity on average, but there's a big spread of values. Some of the trees really not kind of influenced. There's very few pests and diseases known for them, and the ones that we do know don't appear to do much. But for some of them, it's pretty impactful. We're losing, 75% of the production of remaining population. And obviously in the mitigated case, the values are proportionately less severe because we've kept more pests and diseases out of the country. Good. Okay. What about the unknown unknowns? This is the kind of accumulation curve of pests and diseases in the risk register. The first one was in 2012, and we've gone up, but in the last few years, very few new tree pests and diseases have entered the register. This just shows you the likelihood, the impact and likelihood scores for those. So we don't think we're missing anything major, but it doesn't mean new things won't evolve and suddenly pop up to cause problems. Okay, good. So it's a thought experiment, and I hope it kind of gets people thinking about this idea that we're not just dealing with one thing or two or three, we're dealing with hundreds. At least we are in the UK, and you may well be here as well. So understanding what the interactions are, and is it that they act independently, or do they suppress each other, or do they facilitate each other? I mean, that's an interesting question. It's hardly anything in the literature on it. Yeah, good. So just pretty much to finish, I want to show you three of the worst villains that kill the most trees in the UK that we have to fear and loathe as foresters, and here they are. Look at them. These are the bad boys of the ecosystem, really. Anyway, so still, fighting a battle against those. Good. Right. So to conclude, this is a thought experiment. We're not really predicting things. This is a thought experiment. Okay. What does it mean when more than one thing turns up? We've got a lot of uncertainties of what the invasion probabilities are. And, I thought it would be easy to find impact levels. How much damage is done by these different diseases and pests? There's hardly anything in the literature. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. So we need to know how much damage they're doing. If the situation is much better than we think it is, and they're hardly doing any damage, then why are we worrying about it? If it's worse than we think, we should be worrying a lot more, So I think this is a kind of, hopefully will trigger some discussion anyway. And then, just a warning, even under relatively optimistic likelihood impact estimates, the combined damage levels can be very severe. Good, right. So just to thank the Add Trees study that funded this, and the South Africa visit this time was funded by CRI, and they're going to take me to Kruger on the weekends. And the World Universities Network as well, which is funding my visit with David. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you for a very thought-provoking presentation that I'm sure is going to lead to quite a bit of discussion. So let's see, thoughts from the audience.
Thank you so much for the talk. That was amazing. What models are you using to train your system? Are you using open source, like what's available with Gemini or?
Oh, no, I mean the model's very simple. It's just very simple maths. We don't need to.
So, what is the extent of AI and assisted machine learning in the development of these?
Oh, so within add trees, there's a lot of machine learning going on, which is basically the use of deep Gaussian process models to emulate the output of the Joule's process-based model. Don't ask me about deep Gaussian processes because I don't know about them. That's the mathematicians.
And then what level are you vetting and curating your data at? So you're getting feedback from your machine learning systems. How are you validating what it's giving you? Are you holding its hand in the training process? Or are you kind of just giving it the information with the instruction and seeing what it gives you?
Yeah, so the Joule's model outputs being validated against whatever observational data is out there in the UK. So we're collaborating with the Forestry Commission, who have data on tree growth rates and that kind of thing. Yeah, but the deep Gaussian process models just seem to be very good at rapidly emulating the outputs of the process-based models. They do it fast, so yeah.
But what is the advantage of that compared to open source machine learning?
A lot of it is open source, I think.
Are you using Alpha Llama with Gemini? Are you using the new?
No. We don't need to. Yeah.
And I was wondering about how you choose your pests and pathogens to put into your model. So if you look at any tree, there's zillions of potential pest pathogens. So do you select them based on the fact that we've created epidemics in other places?
No. So DEFRA selects them on so we used all of the DEFRA data. So all of the 1,400 that are listed, we just added the whole thing. DEFRA has selected them on the basis that they might cause a problem in the UK, but they're not. There are a few which are already in the UK, but are listed for some reason anyway. But they're the ones which are, they're on the radar, let's say. They're on the radar. So anything that's not listed is probably, they think there's not going to be a problem. Yeah.
So related to species distribution modeling of like the climate in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, so there are, I mean, there'll be things like scanning EPO data, for example. So EPO have big lists of risks and hear a voice. So EPO have a list of pathogens. So DEFRA are kind of working across, even though we're in the Brexit situation, we're still talking to plant health organisations in other countries, and they scan the literature. If there's an alert from Japan or something, they'll take a look, decide what's known about it. So they're still looking, but as you can see, the curve has kind of shallowed off, and we're not adding as many as they were. So I think it's a relatively, to date, complete list of the plant health threats to the UK.
So my second question is, you start off by saying that Joule's is going to develop this prediction system for landowners to decide what to plant.
Yeah.
So is the long-term goal that you're going to be able to say, okay, they say they're going to plant a spruce, but you'll tell them, no, don't plant it there because there's a big risk of getting this pest or pathogen? Are you planning to try to integrate it like that?
That's the idea, but that's the point at which the biologists and the mathematicians diverge slightly. there are certain pathogens for which we can run reasonable process-based models. So there are models for Phytophthora, Ramorum in the UK, other Phytophthora. We've had this wave of Phytophtheras arriving. They're like the Vikings have arrived, you know. Ramorum, Cornovii, Pluvialis, all these, and they all arrived in the southwest, in Devon, where I live. I don't think it's my fault. Yeah, it's just wet, you know. So they then once they've arrived, they head up the west coast, basically. And so we've got models for those based on leaf wetness duration and temperature response functions. For various insect pests, we've got growing degree day models, which we can run. But the point I wanted to make to the Add Trees team is that there are so many waiting that we don't know anything about, really. Biologically, we don't have process-based models. And if we want to be honest about, or more honest about what the UK is going to look like in, let's say, 50 years' time, when a lot of these trees aren't even going to be that big in 50 years, and we're thinking about carbon, we've got to use a holistic approach to, if we just model one or two pests, it's not really being honest about what the problem is. So that's going to be an interesting little discussion about how what we can do at the moment, I think, is to give a relative risk rating to different tree species to landowners to say these are more at risk and these are less at risk. But yeah.
Thanks, Dan. My question is about the role of sentinel planting. Does it play any role in informing your scenarios?
I think it's great. I mean, it's brilliant. I don't think it does yet, actually. I've been struggling. I wanted to put a student onto scanning the literature and digging out, actual impact levels for different pathogens, but it's just not much published. But I assume the Sentinel idea will give us that, probably.
Thank you. It's really nice. The picture that you're painting, of course, there's many considerations as well. Like, do you have a list of tree species that you are promoting at the moment, and where do they come from? And then, where is the highest risk factor that you're seeing? So, for example, where are your big imports coming from? Are they coming from states, and is it state plants, or is it coming from Southeast Asia? And are those the tree species that you might want to plant, but then looking at all those pathogen risks?
Yeah, okay.
Maybe if your biggest risks are from Southeast Asia, you might want to plant trees that have already got the resistance to the pest and pathogens.
Yes, right, exactly. So this gets back to this question of native versus exotic versus assisted migration. Up until recently, the Forestry Commission, their job was to produce timber, and they would do that with a very narrow list of exotic conifer species that would grow nice and straight fast. So they were on one side, and on the other side were groups like the Woodland Trust, which is a charity which promotes English woodland. I mean, this is a cultural thing that I'm not sure if that kind of resonates here, but the idea of the wildwood, the beautiful, the haywain picture I showed you at the beginning. Do you know why I put the haywain up there? The trees in, sorry, you're going. So sorry.
Trees, quite a diversity there. It's been advocated for the way to protect.
Diversity is a potential protection against unknown risks. In fact, I think it's the only protection. Now the haywain was up there because all the trees in the background were the English elm, which was wiped out in the 70s by Dutch elm disease. The English elm, interestingly enough, it's not English at all. It was imported by the Romans, who used it to, it's a particular clone that makes these lovely straight sticks that the Romans used to grow their grapevines up. So they could have a nice drink of wine in their saunas while the Brits slaved away. Anyway, so yeah, and the English elm, yeah, lives in the hay wain, and that's why I put it up there. But tree selection, that's the crux, really. What are we going to do? What do we want the landscape to look like? The loss of the English oak, Quercus robur, which seems to be under risk at the moment from various different threats, including the acute oak decline that I showed, would have a severe socio-psychological impact on the UK. If we replace it with some of those less at-risk species, what does that do? I mean, the reaction to ash dieback has been very culturally kind of surprisingly strong in the UK. If you know, which is kind of odd, isn't it? Because we've got so few trees. I mean, anyway, so yeah, that I don't know what the answer to that is, and it's a big, important question. You know, when I go planting with the tree planting guys, they have a very conservative mix of traditional native species. And I do sometimes mention, you know, well, how are these going to do under climate change when this place looks completely different? And they just shrug and hope, fingers crossed. Yeah, I don't know. I can't answer that question.
I have the microphone.
Yeah.
Thanks for a fabulous talk. I thought it's the first time I've ever heard an lecture, and I'm pretty old. That is, it's just a thought experiment, a mind experiment, and it's fabulous, and it's made me think about a lot of things we can talk about later. But you raised the issue of the unknown unknowns, and maybe you answered the question. But we think about this a lot. I take a number of diseases that I've worked on over the years, tree diseases, where we've not known where they came from, and they're not known in the area of origin. They just weren't there. You know, my first job, a very senior government minister said, "We want you to make a list of the greatest threats to, plantation forestry in South Africa." I made a list from the literature. But all of the problems, none of the serious problems have been on that list. But how, so the question in my mind, and maybe we can debate that a little bit, another thought experiment is how one might interrogate that question. So for instance, so we play with questions like, how many fungi are there on Earth? You know, these studies, 5 million or 1 million or 15 million. And how do people come up with that answer? So you go to different niches and you sample to extinction and see how many you get there, and then you make some sums. So maybe to take trees, so this kind of experiment, to take a tree in its native environment, now we've got metagenomic tools and things, and see if it's fungi, how many fungi are there, so isolate to extinction and use the metagenomics and come up with the number of organisms that are present, and then those that are putative pathogens. And then from that say, well, because the numbers you have are maybe 1% or maybe 5% or 10%, because I don't know. But the numbers you have come from reports that represent a certain percentage of the threat, but how big a percentage is that really? The unknown. See, so what I'm trying to get my head around, I'd like your ideas on this, is I just want to get our head around the unknown unknowns, because and I mean we should debate this more. It's incredibly exciting.
No, I mean there have been studies on, relatively blunt studies on the soil microbiome, and and trying to classify fungi in the soil as saprotrophs or pathogens or mycorrhizal or whatever, and look at the patterns in that distribution. But then I mean, I don't know, it's too big for me. But that's what we need to
play with that.
Great. Maybe that is something for AI.
Hello, thanks for the nice talk. With the there's growing evidence that there's pathogens being introduced into native areas from nurseries because of restoration programs. I was wondering, is there a part of Is there any component of your project of biosecurity from nursery sourcing plants for restoration?
Not directly in this, no. So there's a debate in the UK as to where ash dieback came from. And there are two theories. One is it blew in from Europe, and the other one is that it came in on nursery stock. But the kind of irony here is that native ash is so the seeds are collected in the UK. The seedlings, the seeds are germinated. They're grown to a certain size. Then they are exported to Holland for growing up to kind of, stem, I can't remember this, whip level or something, and then they're re-imported back into the UK because it's cheaper to do that than to grow them up in the UK. So possibly it was that brought them in, and it's the nurseries are well known for being the source of lots of different imports of pests and diseases. And in terms of the mitigation actions, focusing on the live plant imports is the #1 priority. Yeah.
Good questions. Dan, you mentioned the fact that in the literature we don't have information about these multi-layered impacts.
Yeah.
Which really, when you mentioned that, I was saying, yeah, and so often, of course, we have this approach of studying, our particular favorite thing, and even in those cases, and even in cases such environments where we often work in plantations, very production focused, we often don't even understand the real impacts of those singular systems.
No.
So that sounds like something we really need to think about and address. Has that been better addressed in agriculture?
Okay, yeah. No, so whenever you read an plant pathology agriculture paper, it starts off with the sentence, well, first of all, we have to feed 20 billion more people in the year 2080, right? That's the first sentence. Second sentence is the pathogen XYZ can cause up to 75% damage in your field. So the number, the phrase, the word up to clearly includes the number 0, right? So that's how we all start our papers. Right, so the question of how much damage is actually done is a tricky one, and is being tackled by this FABI project I'm involved in. It's called the Global Burden of Crop Loss. If you go to croploss.org, there's a website. So what the idea is, good on them, it's very ambitious, is to try and integrate all known information about the damage done by pests and diseases on agricultural crops, and not just that, abiotic impact as well, to build a kind of a continuously updated global atlas on crop loss. Yeah, it's a big one, isn't it? So no, we don't know for a lot of cases. Yeah, it's another unknown, really, but how much damage is actually done. But that's the job. We're trying to pull in all the data and move towards that. Yeah.
So it seems to be something we need to, in forestry, also give some attention. Whether there's facilitation or
I think so.
All those different effects. Think about that. Yes.
How many fail safes are you putting into your models with regards to the credibility of the information and making sure that the data generated is, say, statistically significant, is, say, applicable to the situation because you've trained it how you wanted to train it?
Yeah. So for the Joules model, it's been built up over many years using the best information we have about plant physiology. Wouldn't say it's a perfect model by any stretch, but it does try and take into account most of the important drivers of plant growth and mortality and things. For our trees, we've now tried to add in a wind throw risk model for the future. Because we've got uncertainties across all of the elements, and the number one uncertainty is we don't even know how climate change is going to, the uncertainties in climate change projections are pretty big as well. So we're talking big, big spread. But that's the job. The job is to try and take what information we have, work out where the biggest uncertainties are, where the sensitivities are in the system. And I would say that the biological aspect is a big sensitivity issue. Start to work on that. Yeah.
Right. Last questions. I was going to say we have the director of plant health here. Yes.
Thanks. I just want to know, in terms of the DEFRA information, do you perhaps know if they considered real interception data of imports? The reason I'm asking is, I recently attended the Commission of Phytosanitary Measures meeting in Rome about 2 weeks ago. And there was a presentation from South American countries to indicate on wood packaging material a whole list of interceptions on wood borders.
Yeah.
Of treated wood packaging material in terms and treated according to the international standard for that. Now the question is that a mitigation option, but was it executed correctly? So if you factor that in when we solve another problem.
Yeah. So I guess if you look, so by all means, after this, when you go home and you're bored at home, download the DEFRA data and play through it. It's great fun. But they have a lot of additional information about how they estimated the relative risks and they have a likely mode of entry for each of the pests and diseases. So for the wood borers and things, the mode of entry is most likely to be the wood packaging, right? Or other type of trade stuff. But for a lot of the fungi, it will just be they blow in, or they're in the live plant trade. So they have that information, and the mitigated risk estimates are DEFRA imagining they've got infinite power and money to scan everything, and I imagine your dream, you can stop anything coming in, and yeah, so it's combination of those. It's important to realize these are not quantitative estimates, they're qualitative relative estimates. And we discussed this paper, this manuscript, with the DEFRA guys before we submitted for publication. And they were at pains to point out to us not to overinterpret the data, but hey, that's what I'm here for. I mean, I wanted to make the point that we need to start thinking about these types of things, and the fact that DEFRA have done all this work to try and at least give us a relative scaling of what's at risk from what is a fantastic piece of work that they've done. Yeah.
And I would imagine that it guides, your mitigation measures. Really understanding where the high risks are on a very, very long list.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, I hope people really start thinking. I don't think many people realize just how many of these organisms are queuing up.
So, Jan Hendrik, for our data project, we have a new standard to aim for. And Dan will have to bring you over and help us set up some of these databases and unpack them. I'm going to bring the conversation to an end there.